St. Louis is finishing up an extension to its metro system that's going to open this summer. Now, I will take what I can get when it comes to metro extensions in the US at this point, but of all of the places to do it, this one feels like maybe not the right spot.
This week, we're going to dive into the new St. Louis MetroLink extension to the Mid-America Airport, as well as some potential plans for BRT in a system that they're calling the Green Line. We'll talk about the positives and negatives of this project, and we'll also talk about why some attempts at rail extensions in the denser part of the cities really haven't come to fruition.
Yeah, and this is a project that I was pretty excited about until I started looking at the maps a little bit more. And Chris and I have some differing of opinions that we'll get into, I think, as we discuss this further on. But to give you some of the details, this is a 5.2-mile extension to the existing metro line that heads out to the Mid-America Airport. It's set to open over the summer, like we said. And a major upside here is for a 5.2-mile extension, this is only coming in at a cost of $150 million. And that also includes some additional infrastructure that's being built out in this area, including a bike path, as well as some enhancements to streets in the nearby area.
Sounds like a really good price tag for a 5.2-mile extension. Again, we can think back to a previous episode we did about the Chicago area where there was about a 5-mile extension that cost $1 billion a mile. So I think this is actually really, really cheap.
In that regard, it is really cheap, but when you look at a map and compare the two of them, these are nothing close to the same at all. This one essentially is running through a bunch of empty fields to this secondary airport in the St. Louis area, and I'm being negative about it because, as I said, this is the secondary airport. This is not St. Louis's main airport. The only airline that flies out of here is Allegiant, which is just a budget airline, and the numbers to make this make sense don't really add up to me, if I'm being honest. So when we look at the passengers, the main airport in St. Louis sees 16 million passengers annually. That's great, a ton of people. The airport also has 15,000 people who work at it. Another really great thing, it makes tons of sense to why years ago the city decided to extend the metro to their main airport. When you look at the data of how many people actually use the metro system leaving the main airport in St. Louis, you end up with a combined total of about 1,500 people per day using the metro system there. That's actually down from about 2,000 per day in 2011. Unfortunately, we don't have more up-to-date data because the transit agency there does not give us very good information in terms of per station boardings, unfortunately. Not the kind of ridership you would necessarily expect from an airport that sees 16 million passengers. But when we make the comparison to the Mid-America Airport, the numbers are pretty stark.
This airport did see a record passenger number in 2025, but that record passenger level was only 384,000 passengers.
Yeah, when you do the math on that, divided by 365 days a year, we're talking just over 1,000 passengers per day. So 1,000 passengers per day total versus, 16 million. Okay, not all 16 million getting off in St. Louis, but probably 10 million are. With 10 million passengers at the main airport in St. Louis, seeing just 1,500 riders per day on the metro system. I mean, when you're dealing with only 1,000 potential people per day and a much smaller employee count, this is not boding well. The airport has just 5 gates in total. They are hoping to grow. I'm being very doomer about this if you can't tell. They are hoping to grow the Mid-America Airport to attract other low-cost carriers like the ones Chris mentioned. But, I mean, even if they doubled their passenger counts, the math still doesn't really make sense for me at this point.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it makes any sense. And so the other idea is, well, maybe there is a large industrial base around this airport. But there's really not. There's mostly fields and a lot of low density in this region of St. Louis. There is an Air Force base, so that's a good use case for getting passengers to an Air Force base. However, the red line already extends to the Air Force base, so that passenger area or that passenger need is already being serviced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the best thing I could find in terms of having a workforce of people coming out. Obviously, you are going to have you already do have some employees who work at the Mid-America Airport, but we're not talking big numbers here. I mean, TSA agents who are processing only 1,000 people per day. Same thing for Allegiant staff members. I'm sure there are a few, vendors and whatnot set up inside of the airport, but we're not talking thousands and thousands of people. Again, it's 15,000 people at the main airport in the city. It's going to be probably well less than 1,000, maybe less than 500 at the airport here. You do have a Boeing facility that is located at the airport. Unfortunately, though, it would require a 1.2-mile walk to get from the end of the metro station to the Boeing facility. And from what I can tell, there's not even a sidewalk to do it. So I would not expect people to be doing it there. But that's where we are with this, essentially. That is what's going on at the Mid-America Airport.
Yeah. So local officials who are touting this project, they're not really out there promoting the huge gain in ridership that a lot of other metro systems would be promoting when they're getting ready to build something like this. One thing that they are hoping is that the airport will have an expansion. So they, as Lewis said, they're trying to court these other low-cost carriers to increase the total number of gates at this airport.
Yeah, when you mentioned the ridership, when we actually look back, some of the earlier extensions to this line were studied in the late 90s. I found an FTA report from 1999, actually, that references the eventual planned extension to the Mid-America Airport station. And I'm going to read one quote from it that says, "The Mid-America Terminal Station of the second phase is projecting one of the lowest ridership levels for any station on the entire MetroLink." And that was them projecting out to 2010. They went on further in the study. I was reading a good chunk of it to say that is very unusual for terminus stations on any line, because we've talked about this on the show before, you want to have kind of anchors on either end of the line so that you have ridership using the whole thing. Not really an anchor to end your line here.
No, I wouldn't say that, no. Also, 1999, if we're going back that far, I mean, really that only feels like it was, 11 years ago, right?
Oh.
That is interesting, though, that in 1999 they were projecting out 10 plus years, and we're still saying the ridership is not going to be there. So why is this getting built? If it is not a major hub for travelers, if it is not a major employment hub for local residents, if it is already serving this Air Force base and now all that is left are fields, what is the driver for getting this done when we look at projects all across the country that are having their budgets slashed and being canceled? Why is this one moving forward when it seems like it's going to have such a little impact? And there is one really big reason. Actually, there's about 45 billion reasons. In 2019, Illinois passed the Rebuild Illinois Capital Program, which unlocked $45 billion in infrastructure spending for the state of Illinois. 33.2 billion of those dollars are set aside specifically for transportation projects. And a significant portion of that is set aside for projects just outside of the Chicago region. Because when you think about transit in Illinois, you're probably not thinking of anywhere except for that upper corner that hugs Chicago.
Later in the show, we're going to talk specifically about another project that a lot of folks, I think, would have rather seen money go to. But people often forget. I mean, I don't think about St. Louis all the time. Sorry, St. Louis folks. But until I really looked at it again, you forget that it's right on the state line here. This is a unique system that crosses both in the states of Missouri as well as Illinois. And obviously this extension is falling on the Illinois side. So when, the state of Illinois is looking at this and Metro, the transit agency is looking at it, they see a project that's basically shovel ready and they see money that could potentially head their way. I mean, I really don't blame them for really trying to push this forward, as much crap as I've been talking about it the last couple minutes.
No, and you made a good point about shovel ready. And this project truly was near shovel ready when the money appeared. As we talked about in 1999, they had already done this study about extending it out to this airport. The authorities in this area had already started buying up right-of-way and securing that right-of-way for future expansions, because as we know, and we've said many times in the show before, like the cheapest time to build something was yesterday. Every
Yes.
year you wait, things get more expensive. These local authorities knew that, were buying up right away as they could. They had also completed most of the environmental impact study, which, as we've also talked about on this show, is such a huge drain of resources and takes so much time.
It
To
better
get
have been
completed.
short for this one. It better have been.
What's the impact? We're building a railroad through a field. That's the impact. But all of that was completed ahead of time, and so they had this project that had been sitting on, a shelf, not really with that many hopes of getting it done anytime soon. And now Illinois has passed all of this transit infrastructure money, and it was the right place, right time. You pull that plan off the shelf, dust it off, and you say, "Here you go, Illinois. We are ready to move forward." And I think that's exactly what happened. And now they are moving forward and getting this done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it at a price tag of only $150 million. And again, that's including a couple other pieces of infrastructure here. You don't hear about any transit projects being funded for that. And in an ideal world, I would have liked to see that $150 million be allocated to go towards the project we're going to talk about next, which is ironically also a 5.5-mile proposed project. There were talks of doing this Green Line light rail in St. Louis proper, on the Missouri side of the line. But the reality is that money would have not been available to do this on the Missouri side, as these were Illinois funds that were making it happen. So as much as I'd love to be like, hey, even if this other 5.5-mile project in the more dense part of town would have been much more expensive because you're dealing with roads and construction and a lot of more utilities and all this sort of stuff versus an empty field, that money in a perfect world would be able to be used for either, but we don't live in a perfect world, as we know, for a whole variety of reasons that we're
Right.
not going to talk
Illinois is
about.
not gonna just like gift this money to the city of St. Louis, which is primarily on the Missouri side of the river. So yes, it makes sense. Also, Illinois, I believe, has a much larger GDP than the state of Missouri, so it's they have a much more impressive budget to be able to do these sort of projects. And outside of the ridership numbers and everything that you would normally tout on this kind of project, what politicians are really touting about this is that they are planning for future economic development in this region. They are hoping that if they build this rail line, that these empty fields will become more, that it will become an industrial region, that you will have more connectivity to this area. And one of the things I was reading about this made a good point that if you don't build the rail, that investment's definitely not coming. If you do build the rail, there's a chance that investment might come. So it's really if we build it, they will come sort of mentality. And the last thing that I will say about this is the folks in this region are actually very lucky that Illinois did pass this transit funding bill, because most projects like this really rely on the federal New Starts program. And as we've talked about also earlier last year, after the current administration took office, programs that rely on federal New Starts, or really any federal funding, are really up in question right now. They're hitting the chopping block. They're getting scaled back. New Starts, if they were to look at this project and they saw the ridership numbers, I think it would have absolutely died in that program.
And to be honest, it should have died in that program. Like if we're looking at federal, you know what I mean? Federal dollars should be spent in ways that are going to impact way more people. I do appreciate the effort here. I'll be curious to see if it does generate some new buzz in the rural part of far western. I don't know. I remain skeptical. We'll see.
And honestly, I disagree with you. I think federal money should go to projects like this as well. I mean, I don't think we should discriminate based on large population centers versus
in a perfect world where the
like
transit budget is enormous and everything can get funded. Yes, but I would much rather see the federal dollars be going towards the project that we're going to talk about in a second, that the reason they didn't do it was because they were afraid they weren't going to qualify for federal dollars. I'd rather see it go towards Austin's light rail, where, we're running through downtown with a whole lot more people. Yeah. LA's projects that run through much more. So in a perfect world, I agragree. Yes. But
I will say, a couple episodes ago, if you recall, you were really excited about a train to nowhere in Germany. So
that's true, but the Germans they for a while funded it. Right now, it's a little more quiet. I mean, they're spending some money now, but the U.S. is not Germany in that regard. But you're not wrong. You're not wrong. All right, let's move on to the Green Line here. So, like I said, it is also a 5.5 mile project. It would run down Jefferson Avenue through a more dense part of St. Louis, especially in the portion south of downtown. You've got kind of some row homes. You've got some apartments, some commercial districts. It runs through kind of the edge of downtown, connects with the existing red and blue lines, and then heads into the north part of the city in an area that I am not going to pretend to know all of the history here, but it seems like an area that's seen better days. I know there is some new investment coming in there with a new government campus for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. They've built a huge compound here that's brand new.
Hey, Lewis, can you tell us exactly what the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency does, just for our viewers?
No. The point is this is an area that a lot of people live in, a lot of people work in. It is adjacent to downtown, and when we compare it to the line we were just discussing, would see a lot more ridership. But let's not compare it to that anymore. I'll stop being doomer about the airport extension. This Green Line actually went up for a vote in 2017, and St. Louis voters approved a half-cent sales tax for this MetroLink extension.
So the estimated cost for that MetroLink expansion would have been about $1.1 billion in June of 2024. When the project started to go through the NEPA phase and all of the FTA, federal approval process, they realized that they needed to bring the price tag down a little bit. They tried to achieve about an $850 million project by reducing the number of stations and trying to use existing maintenance facilities that they already have. But at the end of the day, when they went through the process and they looked at their ridership numbers, they realized they were not going to be competitive enough for other federal grants and ultimately had to pivot away from the light rail extension to another type of project.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because, this thing did make it. It was formally approved by the FTA to get into the project development phase and everything. They were well into doing the NEPA process and everything. But yeah, the funding from the half-cent sales tax just wasn't enough. They had $96 million kind of already accumulated from that new tax, and they were estimating to get an extra 12 to 15 million per year from it. But that was not enough even to finance doing this on their own, obviously. So like you said, they did have to pivot into doing a BRT. And not all of the work that had been done on the light rail portion of this was lost, though. By pivoting to the BRT, they're still staying on a similar alignment, likely. Right now, they're kind of trying to determine the locally preferred alternatives at this stage. But they're able to use a lot of the same work that had already been done, preparing for the NEPA facility or the NEPA process to be able to do this with BRT, which is nice to see. And they're from some of the renderings that we're seeing, again, that none of this is set in stone at this point. This is looking like a real BRT project, not a glorified express bus, but a bus that's operating in dedicated lanes, not with mixed traffic. Although it will still have to navigate intersections, but hopefully you'll get some sort of transit priority.
So as we progress through 2026, this project has started the sort of tier 2 evaluation with plans on that being completed sometime in spring. And then by the end of the year, they will have the locally preferred alternative solidified for their plans, which, again, we've gone over this on an EIS episode in the past. You always have to have those locally preferred alternatives to go into the plan to get that federal funding.
Yeah, so if you're from St. Louis, keep an eye out. I'll put some links in the description. There is lots of opportunities to kind of get involved and share your thoughts on this process and project. So keep an eye out for those. There's also an advocacy group called Citizens for Modern Transit that had a decent amount of good information, as well as a video that kind of had a recent update that was posted only about 2 weeks ago to their YouTube channel that I'll link below for folks to check out as well if you are interested. One other benefit to the pivot to BRT is the potential for this to actually go a little bit further than it would have with light rail. Obviously, the budget was a concern with the light rail, but depending on how much infrastructure they build out for the BRT, this could run much further in either direction, which could connect more people to more places.
So overall, I think we can be pretty supportive of this pivot from light rail to BRT. I do think it's always a little disappointing when we're moving away from tracks to road-based systems. One of the reasons for that is, again, something we've talked about on the show in the past, is that BRT has a lot of potential to be scaled back, especially when a new government's in place and they see BRT or see this as an easy funding cut for city services. So always a little worried about that.
Yeah, even as like they're in the process of building it out, it's like, oh, we're a little over budget. Maybe we don't need to separate the lanes. Like, there's not usually traffic in this area. It can probably just operate here. And then you have a system that's just, you end up with BRT creep, where it just starts to turn into a glorified bus.
Turns into John Whitmer in Houston.
Yes, John. Yeah. If you're interested, we've talked about that in our Houston using only public transit episode. Only other thought on the Green Line here is it is a little disappointing that like a 5.5 mile new rail line for roughly $1 billion, like that feels like a pretty good deal. And sure, the ridership wasn't there today, but when you look at the potential for investment along the line, I mean, that doesn't mean that ridership won't be there tomorrow. To the point that you're making about the airport, maybe they'll have a big boom at that airport. New airlines will come in. A whole bunch of industrial will be built right next to the station, and it'll be a majorly successful spot. And I hope that's the case. I don't think that's going to be the case there, but I hope that it's the case.
That trademark Lewis optimism right there.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a little disappointing to see it not actually go through. But resources are slim at the moment. I hope that that's not going to continue to be the case. But
so if you are in the St. Louis area, or if you're in Illinois and you want to give your thoughts about these two projects, the BRT line and the Mid-America Airport extension of the Red Line out of St. Louis, please put a comment in the comment section in YouTube. Send us an email. We do really appreciate all the feedback that we get on the videos, and we do go through and read all of those, even if we're sometimes a little slow on responding to emails and comments.
Or even if sometimes people are mean to us.
Sometimes people are mean to us.
Usually they're positive, though. If you want to support the show, the best ways to do so are via our Patreon. We just put some bonus content from last week's episode in there, featuring an extended part of our conversation with one of the architects for the gondola project in Paris, which was pretty interesting. We try to get episodes out early there. You can also check out our merch store, buy us a coffee, or things like that. You can also just subscribe, like the video, all that good stuff. So with all of that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your Transit Tangents Tuesday.